Hello and welcome, I'm Johnny and you want to sign up and log in users into your SvelteKit app using magic links. Also known as Passwordless Auth, magic links have become my favorite method to log in. For the user, it makes it easy to switch devices and even seamlessly transition into our dedicated iOS or Android app. We aren't living on a prayer that they're being responsible and using a password manager, and no one is relying on third parties that may fall out of favor or change their integration strategies. At this point, it feels like we'll always have email. So I integrated with a few viable third-party auth service providers that offer magic links as an option. I almost shot this video with one you can find at literally magic.link, but in the end, we're going with Firebase. Magic's only concern is auth, like the top 2 industry standard, Auth 0, but I find it much easier and more modern. Firebase, on the other hand, has an insane amount of offerings besides auth, all with ridiculously generous free tiers. I know a lot of you would want to use Firebase anyway for its databases, its storage, and experience with Firebase looks great on any CV. And there is tons of tech companies at this point that have gone all in on it. I've got timestamps and chapters like always, but you may need to use them more than usual. This video is gonna be a big one and I'll be going into greater detail. Auth is the thing that almost every app has, so let's do our best to get it right and be able to problem solve when things don't go as planned. Sounds good? Alright, SvelteKit server-side auth with magic links and Firebase, let's go! Let's start with the least complicated and most fun thing, a new login page. I'll stop making brand new apps for these videos and just keep extending this one. So I've already added a little question mark in our header. It currently does nothing, but the idea is it will appear when we're not logged in, for curious people to click and navigate to our login page. When we log in later, we'll want this to become the user avatar instead, and get us to the profile page. We'll do that later. Now let's make it navigate us to the login page by turning it into an anchor with an href to /login. Plain old HTML. What renders there will correspond to our routes login, so let's duplicate our routes about Svelte component, rename it, change its title and header, delete some content, and save. And we can now indeed click and navigate to our login page. What we'll want here are some instructions and a form with an input for email and a big button to submit. If we specify that the input is of type email and that it's required, we'll be getting some native browser validation for free. Note that we can even submit just by pressing enter. Let's add some Tailwind classes to make things prettier. We've got a killer combo going for styling. Tailwind with CSS variables. It's fire. Especially in dark mode. Adam from GUI Challenges did an episode right after ours, and I just had to implement his awesome toggle animation. Alright, form looks good. What do we want it to do? Well, even though one of the cool things with SvelteKit forms is that we can make them work without JavaScript, we are forced to create an onSubmit handler and prevent the default behavior. All of the solutions fall a bit short at the moment in that they really rely on their client-side libraries to make their auth flow work. And they all plain crash when you try to run them on the server. I did find a way to email the magic links server side, but then we'd need to bring in our own email service provider like SendGrid, and we'd still need to work with the Firebase client library later to handle the callback. So extra hooks with not much benefit. In the end, our authentication will still be server-based with cookies anyway, so let's bite the bullet and bring in the Firebase client library. npm install dev dependency Firebase. So, something that happens due to the way SvelteKit runs, and Vercel really, which is where we're deploying, is that I don't really know which file will execute where. Maybe a file will run on the server, maybe it will run on the client, maybe it will run twice or more times on both, maybe it won't run at all, maybe it will run for one endpoint, not the other. This can cause trouble with both this Firebase library and the Firebase admin package. We'll add later, as we need to ensure we run their initialize app methods, but only once. So let's create a source lib Firebase client TS and create a method to get the client instance. In there, we'll be running initialize app with some Firebase config we'll add later, and return the client app we just initialized. We also need to get the auth module for this app because we want to set persistence to in-memory. This really means no persistence, which is what we want given we'll be relying on our server, on our own code to keep us authenticated. Cookies. By default, Firebase would have been putting its own cookies all over the place, which we don't want. We won't be tracking the auth state with Firebase, we'll only be using this library to go through the login flow. In any case, we only want to run this setup once, and I found an undocumented way which makes perfect sense. We can check if the getApps helper method has length. If we haven't run the initialize method, it's going to be 0, which is falsy. If we have, it's going to be 1, so we can immediately return the result of getApp. That's our app. If you're wondering why did they even make a getApps method, I'm sure there are use cases where you do actually have multiple different Firebase apps running in the same page. Anyways, we're here because we want to create a send magic link method. We'll get the auth module again, give it the client app, and then we're going to return the result of send sign-in link to email. A method Firebase Auth exports. It takes the auth module we want to use, the email address to send the magic link to, and some action code settings. This is more interesting if you've got iOS or Android apps too. For us, we'll just pass it the redirect URL. To clarify once more, in the docs, you may see these methods called without the modules. If you don't pass them in explicitly, they will magically get them from the global scope or something. But again, we want to be explicit. This is especially important because we're doing hot updates during dev and serverless deployments to Vercel, and our backend staff will even more especially be flipping out if it can't find the modules or tries to recreate them. Alright, this file looks good for now. All we need is to set up this Firebase config. There are many options we can pass here according to which Firebase features we want to use. For us, we just need project ID, auth ID, and database ID. We could hardcode these as they are safe to expose to the client, but it's a good idea to use environment variables here, in case we want to have a development or staging version of our Firebase project, in addition to the production one. Since SvelteKit is using Vite, the way you use environment variables is with import meta env Vite variable name. Vite is needed as a prefix, or else Vite will not expose it for safety. If we want TypeScript to help us with the autocomplete, we can create an env.t.ts file where we'll be extending the import meta env, and we can manually add what environment variables we expect to have here. We can also add a check in the client for whether any env is falsy, in which case throw an error to remind us we haven't set them. Which is the case now. To set them during local development, we can add them to a .env file, which we shouldn't commit to version control. It's in our git ignore because we will be storing actually secret environment variables here later. So how do they become available for our build step? Well, in our case, we need to remember to add them as environment variables in our Vercel dashboard. Cool, now that we know more about how environment variables work, what's the values we should be putting here? For that, we need to actually create a Firebase dashboard. Firebase is a Google Cloud Services product, so if you've got a Google account, you too can have it. With a super generous free tier, since Google is going for the strategy of making individual developers happy, turning them into evangelists, and then closing deals with companies for millions. For example, Magic offers 10,000 logins for free, or 13,000 if you use a referral code, and that's it, you don't get any more recurring freebies. That's more than you need to get started, but Firebase offers 2,000 Magic links on the free tier per day, forever. That's nuts. So we can create a new project, and it is common to create a couple projects here, like with Svelte and with Svelte Dev, if we wanted different environments, but we'll focus on production today. We can create a new web app, and this is where we find the snippet to copy and paste. Again, we won't be hardcoding these, we'll be taking the properties we need and setting them as environment variables. While we're at it, let's go to authentication. We need to authorize the domains we'll be deploying to. Localhost will work by default for local development, as well as some extra domains for deploying to Firebase hosting, but in our case, we want to allow list the with svelte.com domain. I bought this on a whim 2 years ago, and the default domain Vercel deploys to. Unfortunately, we cannot dynamically add domains here or use the wildcard character, which means we'll need to run our full flow end-to-end testing in production. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's also go to sign-in method, because we want to open up email and enable email link. That's the magic links. It's worth noting that Firebase, like the other providers I considered, does offer other authentication methods as well, and implementing them is quite similar to what we're doing today. However, magic links is my favorite, so let's focus on that. Alright, environment variables set. Send magic link convenience method, ready to go. Let's send some emails. Let's go back to our login Svelte file. Remember that? We have this handle submit method, which will be getting the form event, which has a current target, which is of course the form element itself. We can pass the form to the form data constructor and get the email input value. Remember, we're not controlling that input, which is one of the cool things with Svelte. You can mix some good old HTML and JavaScript with super modern stuff. All we need is to pass this email to our send magic link method and the place we want to redirect back to, and we're golden. We haven't created our redirect route yet, but let's say it's going to be /auth/confirm. However, we need to specify absolute paths here, so let's dynamically get this part of the URL by using window, location, origin. There are many things to improve, but believe it or not, we will get a magic link now if I submit the form. Let's check it out. Submit, email received, woohoo! Click, opens in a new tab with a 404. Awesome, as expected. We've yet to create that route, but before we do that, let's make this tab a bit better by introducing a bit of state in our login Svelte component. This is where people reach for is loading and has error booleans, but I've heard where there's a flag, there's a bug. So I much prefer something like a finite state machine for this. We don't need to bring in X state or anything fancy. All we need is to decide the possible states this form can be in. Let's declare a form state type. Our form can only be in a few states. We're working with a finite amount of states. The form starts as idle, then it's submitted, then it can have success, or error, an actual error object, not a string. And now we can declare that our state will have that type and start on idle. When we submit, we set the state to submitted. This method resolves when Firebase has sent the magic link for us. So if we await it, we reach the success state. And we can wrap this in a try-catch block. If we do catch an error, clearly we've made it to the error state. We can use the state for some conditionals too. We can say if the state is not success, we show the form we've always been showing so far, else we can show a success message. And we can cheat a bit and change our initial state to the one appropriate for what we want to design without actually submitting our form. Cheeky time savers. If we are in the submitting state, we want a loading message. But if the state is an instance of error, if it is an error, we want an error message. As a finishing touch, it may be neat to add the user's email to some of this copy. Let's have an email variable which starts as null, but may be a string. And now we reassign this variable instead of creating a const with the email value from the form. Now we can use it in our loading, success, and error messages, and if we simulate a slow connection, we can see the happy path for real. We slowly go through the submitting state and end in success. And we have been getting real emails signing all this time. We will come back to the login page for further improvements later, but for now, let's make our /auth confirm callback page work. So in this page, we've got a few more client-side Firebase methods to run. This is the point where even if we had brought our own email service provider and done everything so far server-side, we'd still need to do something client-side, as there are no workarounds for the sign in with email link Firebase client method we want to run eventually. You'll notice that our redirect URL has had some further search parameters added to it as well. That's the payload Firebase needs to confirm that the correct person clicked the correct URL and everything is legit, but as an extra security measure, Firebase wants us to pass the user's email again. We will figure out the email the user just submitted automatically using localStorage eventually. For now, let's implement as if we couldn't figure it out. For example, Let's say the user requested the login from desktop, but then opened the magic link from their phones, which means we'll need another form here, and it will be suspiciously similar to the one we did before, so let's copy and paste our login.svelte file and turn it into a confirm.svelte file inside the auth directory. This is more of a hidden page users soon navigate to by themselves, so I feel putting it in this path and not the root makes sense. Let's amend our help and flavor text to match with what we're actually doing in this page. And let's handle our states slightly differently. We'll start with a validating state, where we'll be checking whether the magic link is legit. Only then we'll move on to idle, then we'll be submitting, and we may have an error somewhere along the way. Let's write up our if-else logic flow too. Alright, in this page, in this component, we want to check whether we're indeed on a valid magic link as soon as it first renders. I'd love to validate this on the server, but as I mentioned, the Firebase client hard crashes with a lot of its methods when you run it on Node. So, the way we run something when a component first renders in Svelte is by using the magic onMount method, where we can pass an inline fat arrow method with everything we want to happen at that point. And what we want to happen is to execute a method we'll write now back in our Firebase client file. We want to check if the given link is indeed magic. We get the auth module again and return the result of is sign in with email link. Let's bring that method in our onMount, and if our current location is not a magic link, we want to set our state to an error with a helpful message to render and early out. If we make it out of that if block, we are in the idle state and waiting for form submission. What happens when we submit this form? Well, handle submit gets us to the submitting state, and then we want to finally sign in with magic link. Let's write a new helper method in our Firebase client file. It's going to be very similar to isMagicLink, but it's also going to receive an email, and it will be returning the result of sign in with email link from the auth module. So let's have our form handler call our new method, and believe it or not, if we hadn't set auth persistence to none, if we were doing the auth client side, we'd be pretty much done. However, I can confirm we're still in the server side auth video, so we've got work to do still. How are you holding up? Feels like I could have done like 3 videos on CSS animations at this point, so if you are enjoying this, leave me feedback, subscribe, comment, watch this again and code along with me. If you're not enjoying this, I don't know, go watch MrBeast. That guy is awesome. But do leave some feedback before you go. I do want to improve, and speaking of improving, let's improve what's gonna be the most common flow. Let's remember the user's email from the login form and automatically sign them in when they open the magic link in the same browser. We will use the browser's local storage for this. We could use server-side cookies if we wanted to complicate our lives again, but there is literally no benefit given we're forced to complete the sign-in client-side anyway. So let's create a local storage directory and a magic email TS file where we'll write a few more helper methods. We can decide on the key we want to store the user's magic email at, and then the login form is going to set it in local storage. So this will take in the email value, local storage, set item the email. Then our confirm for will be getting that email, and we should clear it from local storage in the end. It can only cause problems if we keep it around. So on mount, we can now get that magic email, and only if it's falsy, we set the state to idle and return. If not, we want to finish the login automatically. Let's extract pretty much all of our handle submit into a login method, which will be taking in a magic email. It will be setting that to our component level email, and now our handle submit can call login and pass in the email from the form, and our onMount can also call login with the magic email from the component state. And everything will work the same, but the automatic method is clearly better as the user doesn't have to fill in yet another form. Alright, to make this a more exciting demo, let's show something different on the screen. Let's get a reference to the credential here. On successful login, this resolves to what Firebase calls a user credential. This thing has the user, and we can get the token. The JSON web token will be posted to the server shortly. Let's set it as an error in our state. This way, it'll render immediately on the screen, and we don't have to resort to console login. Sweet! Let's go through the flow. In a live demo, this is where I'd ask for confidence levels on whether this is gonna work, but surely I'm not gonna waste your time by showing this fail, right? Ta-da! This is a JWT if I ever saw one, so we've done things correctly so far. We can even check the Firebase dashboard, and indeed, we've got a confirmed user. Someone went through the flow. But to actually keep the user logged in, we need to do a few things server-side. So, instead of setting an error state, what we actually want to do with a token is to send it in a post request. We'll fetch our own auth session endpoint we'll be creating right after. The request method is going to be post, and there are a few ways to send this token. We could just put it in the request body, but the most traditional way to do it is with headers, with an authorization header that has a bearer token. There are a few authorization schemes like basic. We're specifying we're using bearer here. It doesn't really matter given we'll be the ones handling this request with our own SvelteKit endpoint, so we can just make things up. But why make things up when you can follow a standard that's more easily Googleable? We're gonna make that endpoint respond with our user as JSON. So if we chain a then here to parse that JSON, we'll have a reference to our user for later. We probably don't want to stay in this screen after logging in, so let's use SvelteKit's magic goTo method to go to, say, the index page. This is all well and good, but nothing is handling that post to auth session, which means it's backend time. To handle a post request to auth session, we need to create our routes auth session TS file and export a post method from it. To see it the other way around, SvelteKit Magic ensures this file handles requests to this path and that its post export specifically will be the one handling the post requests. The request handler gets given locals, which get put into the request by a hook we'll see later, but what we're really interested in is the request itself. We can new up the headers instance out of it and get our authorization header. Because we were old school sticklers, this header is not just a token, it is a string which starts with bearer as a space and then the token. So we can be sticklers again, split on that space, which should give us an array with two elements, the authorization scheme and the token. If the scheme is not bearer, or if we ain't got no token, we can return an error response by returning an object with a 401 status and a helpful message. I'd love to say that here we quickly get our user object and handle our happy path. However, we first gotta set up Firebase admin. Oof. It's similar to what we did for the Firebase client, but even less convenient. But we can do it. So let's npmi the Firebase admin and create a Firebase admin TS file. Getting the admin app is going to be more convenient than getting the client app actually. Remember, we're doing this to ensure there is exactly one instance of the admin app running. However, we don't have to do anything further this time for initialization, so we can even inline the return value. So, the Firebase admin app module exports similar methods to the Firebase client app module. We're checking if there is any apps to get. If yes, we get the app. If not, it means we haven't initialized one yet. So we run our initialize app method and return its result, which is the admin app. About this config though, this admin config. Firebase really wants you to deploy a secret file for initialization. However, that's not convenient since we're deploying to Vercel. Environment variables are relatively easy with Vercel, we went over them before, but encrypting and decrypting files is not. And hardcoding anything is not an option here. The things to make the admin app work must not be leaked under any circumstances. People will be able to cause all sorts of trouble if they've got admin privileges to our app. So we will go through the steps to create a new service account. We will download our JSON file of credentials, but what will we do with it if we can't upload it? Well, turns out there is another undocumented way to make this work. The only config we need is the credential, and we can create it ourselves using the cert method from the app module. All we need is our project ID, which we've already got for initializing the client, the admin client email, and the private key. All of this we can find in the service account credentials JSON file we just downloaded. It's got other stuff too, but that's all we need. And remember, never leak these. Never show them to anybody. But do get in there, copy the values we want, copy the client email, paste it into .env for vit Firebase admin client email, copy the private key, paste it for vit Firebase admin private key. And let's not forget to add them in the Vercel dashboard too, or our deployments won't work. And yes, I am adding the vit prefix, so vit will process them and we can use them with import meta.env, which means that if we're careless, we can use them in the front end. Nothing will stop us. Again, it's on us to be safe and ensure we only use them in backend things, such as the SvelteKit endpoints, not the SvelteKit pages and components. That said, let's update our TypeScript definition file too, and clear the final hurdle for initializing the client. One last weird trick you won't believe works. We need to replace any escaped new lines in the private key with unescaped new lines. After all of this, our admin app will initialize correctly, so let's give ourselves a pat on the back and write our first helper method, verify ID token. Remember the token from the endpoint handler? We want to verify it, and it's very similar to how the Firebase client works. We get the auth module and can try calling it. If the token is not valid, this method will throw an error and we can return another unauthorized response. But if it is valid, this method will resolve to the decoded ID token, which is essentially our user. Amongst other things, the decoded token has a sub, which is the user's unique ID, as well as an email. So we're full on the happy path here. We've got a user, we can return them as the body of a 200 response, but we also want to return a cookie. If you've watched the SSR dark mode video, you've seen this before. The way we set a cookie with SvelteKit is by including it in a set cookie header. So we can say our session cookie is session equals some value and give it some options for safety, including same-site strict, HTTP only, secure, make sure it works anywhere in our domain, and a max age. Max age has to be in seconds, let's say 1 week. And we won't be dealing with refreshing the session today, as we're already dealing with so much. So, what about the value of the cookie? Well, Firebase admin will construct this for us, so we could actually take our string, get in our Firebase admin TS file, and write a create session cookie helper method, which returns the cookie we want to set. Before that, we want to get the auth module and create session cookie. Our method will be given the token and the max age. Firebase admin's create session method takes the token, and an options object will only be using expires in. That's the time to expire in milliseconds, so not our max age. Watch out. Max age is in seconds. Its expires in is going to be our max age times 1000. So we've got the session value now. It's in our cookie. We're using this helper method to return it with our response, which also has the user in the body. We're golden. So a cookie will be set with these fetch, but why? Why do we want a session cookie again? That's right, because we're doing server-side auth with SvelteKit, and we're almost there. Our server can now read that cookie if it exists and determine if the user is logged in or not. Again, we did a similar thing in our SSR dark mode video, where we've read the theme cookie and put it in SvelteKit's special session store. As a reminder, stores is what you use for shared state in Svelte, and SvelteKit creates a session store for you based on what you've got as the return value of the getSession hook. If you haven't followed along with that video, no worries, all we need is a hooks index.js file which exports a getSession hook. Whatever object we return in this method will be in our session store, so if we return a user property, it will also be available in the session store. However, for our theme it was kinda fine to only implement the getSession hook, as no endpoint really would need to know about the theme. But now, it feels like loads of endpoints may want to access the user too. So, just putting the user in the session object is not enough. The proper way to do this is to first implement another hook, called handle. Handle gets the request, can do all sorts of operations to it, and then has to resolve and return it. We've learned too much in this video to go into a further level of detail for this. What's important is that we are supposed to put useful data endpoints may want to use inside the request locals object. So we'll straight up mutate that, put the theme in there, then our getSession can get the theme from the locals and return it. Why go through all this trouble? Well, we may put things in our request locals that our backend should have easy access to, but shouldn't make it to the front end, shouldn't be in the session store. For example, the theme is fine and safe, but let's put the ID token in the locals. For that, we need our final helper method. Back in Firebase admin, one last time, let's get ID token from session cookie. If there is no session cookie, we return null. If there is, we should verify it. So we get the auth module again and we verify session cookie. Much like the verify ID token method, this will return the decoded ID token, but we don't want it to ever crash, so let's catch any errors and return null if they happen. If the cookie is not valid, the user is null, they're not logged in. So now we've got the whole ID token in the locals, which we don't necessarily want to expose to the frontend. Instead, let's manually create our user object again. If there is an ID token, we get the sub for the ID and the email for the email. If not, the user is null. Sweet, we've got the user in the session store. How do we access them? Let's create a derived store as a convenience. Once again, this is something we've done for the theme. We want to create a store's user TS. We're gonna export user, which is going to be a Svelte derived store, derived from the session store, magically available from app stores. The session may have many properties, so the point of our user store is to directly get to the session.user. And since we're here, let's also write a convenience method for setting the user. SetUser is going to take a user object, or null, since we'll probably want to provide logout functionality, and update the session store. We want to spread the session to keep all other existing properties, like the theme, but set the user property to what we were given. And now we can even use this convenience method back in our auth confirm page to set user to the user from the response we got back from auth session. It's all coming together. Well, in fact, everything works now, but how do we prove it? Let's do the thing that we said in the beginning and show the user's avatar in the header if they're logged in. So in our profile component, we want to use our brand new user store. If we've got a $user, we'll link to the profile page and show some fresh UI. If not, we'll show our lovely question mark. Spoiler alert, you can see that we are indeed showing the first letter of the user's email address in the header because we are logged in. No smoke and mirrors here, we do have a user, this has actually worked. which is great as we can design in peace. Sweet, we'll implement logout right after another demo now. I'll log myself out by clearing the cookies in localhost and let's go. So, if we refresh, we get a question mark because we've got no session cookie, we're not logged in. I fill in the form, get the email, click the link, ta-da! And then we click the initial and we get a 404 as we haven't made that page yet. But we can see that if we refresh anywhere, we're still logged in. It's persisted, we're awesome. No client-side HTTP request for this. We are doing server-side SvelteKit Auth with Firebase for realsies. To celebrate, let's make a rudimentary profile page by copy and pasting our rudimentary about page. This is where we can show the user's favorite lessons if we implement that functionality in the future. After all, we are logging users in so they can have some extra features, right? But remember, this isn't a real app. I made this for you to convey a more realistic use case. So keep bringing your use cases and I'll see what type of video I'll be making next. But we still got stuff to do in this video. Logout button time, and we aren't forced to use client-side JavaScript for this one, so we can do it SvelteKit style with a plain old form with a post action to an endpoint. Let me note here that I don't consider this bit that important, given we've gone over so much today, and I'll probably do a dedicated episode on SvelteKit forms eventually, but I do think long-term exposure does help commit stuff to memory. So, warning, I'll go through this fast. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense, this is not the video where it should make sense. Alright, with plain old vanilla HTML forms, we can only set two types of methods, get and post. However, with SvelteKit, we can specify a method override property in SvelteConfig.js inside Kit, and then we can provide a query parameter for _method, which will turn the request into one of the more hipster methods you may want to use, like put, patch, or delete. That is our case. We do not want to post to auth session again. We are already doing that to set the session cookie. Now we want to delete our session cookie, which will log us out. So the method we want is indeed delete. How do we handle a delete request to auth session? We open our routes auth session.ts and add a del handler in it. We already have a post handler. We would be adding a delete handler if we could. However, delete is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, like class, so SvelteKit goes with del as the magic name for delete handlers. And all we want is to return a 200 with a set cookie header. Why a set cookie header when we're trying to delete a cookie? Well, that's how it works, I'm afraid. To delete a cookie, we need to return it expired. So we can copy our cookie string from our helper method. We don't need any value. What we need is a max age of 0, which will immediately expire and unset the cookie. Put the cookie down. Cool, logging out will already work now, even without JavaScript. Remix has been milking this functionality, and it is cool, but the default form behavior is why we started using so much JavaScript in the first place, so let's use some to enhance the experience. Svelte has this thing called actions you can give 4 elements to use, and I noticed the SvelteKit demo app has an enhance action. It's using it in all its forms. So I copied and pasted it in an actions directory as enhance form, and we can use it in our logout form. It prevents default form behavior, so we won't navigate away, and takes 3 optional methods: a pending method for when the form submits, an error method if something goes wrong, and a result method for when it's succeeded. Result is the one we care about, as we handle logout our way, by setting the user to null and navigating to our index page. If all of this looks nuts but intriguing, feel free to ask for a video where I explain it properly. Speaking of doing things properly, let's add some redirects to our pages as a final bit of polish. We do not want unauthorized users to be able to get to our profile page. For that, we can use the magic load method SvelteKit pages have, so we need another script tag. This one has to be a module, as we're gonna export a load method. SvelteKit will run this on the server. Load methods have access to the session object too, so we can get it out and check. If there is no session user, return a redirect to the login page with a status code of 302. If not, we return an OK 200 status. We can do the same for our login page. If we are logged in and we somehow make it to this page, maybe we had it bookmarked, we can redirect to our profile page. And that's probably where we should be going when our confirm page is done, while we're at it. I'll show the address bar so we can indeed see. I can try to go to the login page directly, but no dice. Let's log out. This works as expected too, and now it's the profile page I can't see even when I try to access it directly. So let's deploy this and have a full-blown, full-flow demo and call it a day using my phone. So I go to this amazing new app that's so hot right now amongst all the software engineers. I'm not logged in. I tap the question mark, I fill in my email address, I submit, email time, open that up, follow the link, and I am logged in. Awesome! I can see my profile, can refresh any of these pages, and I'm still logged in. And there is no flash or loading spinner for the avatar, as it is indeed the server that's already checked and determined that we are logged in. The server renders the avatar straight away. I can come back almost a week later and I'll still be logged in. But I can log out now and boom, my session is gone. Ta-da! Further enhancements would be some over-engineering, like putting our session in Redis, which could mean that I can log out from every device at once. We could refresh our session on every request or after some specific requests, or make some WebSocket magic to log into every window after I've followed the magic link successfully. But we're starting to work together as a community here, so you let me know what you'd like to see. What I'd like to see is you watching this video again and coding along. And some say that if you leave my videos playing while you sleep, you wake up as fresh as the cookies we just made. Thanks a bunch for watching, I'll see you around.